Welcome, everybody. My name is Craig Warren. I'm 71 years old, been married almost 53 years, father of 9 and grandpa to a bunch. I'm sort of retired. I retired at 65 to provide full-time care for my wife, who's had some serious health issues. But lately, I've realized that I need something to do to keep my mind active. So why not a podcast? I have a lot of experience, and I've definitely done a lot of things over my 50-plus years in the workforce. I have a lot of opinions, so what more would I need? I should mention that I have never been a member of a political party, and I do not intend to do so. My podcasts do not come from a political place, just a factual and common sense place. So for this edition of the Old Farts podcast here, Ramblings of an Old Fart, that's what I do. You know that by now, probably. I want to talk about the climate change thing, the CO2 thing. And the question is it all man's fault? All of mankind. We're the only ones at fault here, or we're the only cause. I think that's a dangerous thing to assume, and I want to give you some new discoveries and some new scientific information that may throw a little bit of doubt on that premise. The first one I found very interesting. Science has recently found in their study, of course, we're all head up to go to Mars and resettle it, right? But there's a distinct interaction from Mars to the Earth. New research shows that a 2.4 million year gravitational cycle between Earth and Mars said it affects the deep ocean currents and global warmth. Current science suggests that it could have had an impact on our ice ages, when they came and when they receded, maybe just like now. But it also, records show, and the research shows that it causes deep sea eddies, massive underwater whirlpools that help keep the ocean from becoming stagnant. That's kind of weird, huh? Then we also have another interesting thing I found. They call it dark oxygen. They discovered that at the bottom of the ocean, in many places, there are basically natural batteries. On the seafloor, they call these polymetallic nodules. And just like any of those, they actually create an electric current because of the salt water and these metallic minerals that are in those nodules. But they actually create oxygen, just like we would today trying to separate hydrogen from water. We use electrolysis, same principle as this. On one node, you'll have hydrogen form. On the other one, you'll have oxygen. And when you have gases in a liquid, what do they usually do? They rise to the surface, right? They bubble up. So we have been told, if you remember your science days, that oxygen from, our Earth's oxygen is done through photosynthesis in plants. That's not exactly 100% true in today's world. The other thing is, recent studies have found that in areas like the Congo, the Amazon, the rainforest, and even in the Arctic where the snow and the stuff has receded and things have warmed up, the peat beds, like they have in the Arctic, they also have these that have been submerged in water for thousands of years in the Congo and in the Amazon. They are now venting carbon naturally, suggesting that the Earth has its own carbon exhaust system, independent of human activity. Scientists found that lakes in these regions are venting carbon that is 2,000 to 3,500 years old. It's been trapped in these peat beds. It was assumed that this carbon was safely locked away, but now we see that these areas, now that they're warmer and they're drying out, the Earth itself starts exhaling its stored carbon. The concern today is, though, how fast the CO2 levels are rising. We think that it's been taking thousands or hundreds of thousands of years to accomplish what we've done over a very short period of time. They could be correct about that, but there are other things at play here. During the Cambrian period, CO2 levels were at nearly 10 times higher than they are today. The Earth didn't die. It was a greenhouse Earth with no polar ice. which is exactly how the planet's default setting has been for over 70% of the Earth's history. The Earth uses rock. It's called rock weathering. The rain hitting the mountains like the Himalayas or Rocky Mountains or wherever you're at, to vacuum carbon out of the sky over millions of years. The process is free, it's effective, it's unstoppable, but it works on a geological clock, not a political one. My fear is today is what I call monovision, or tunnel vision, if you will. We're only focusing on this one pathway, right? Where it looks, as you can see, there are some other pathways that we might want to explore, but we're not spending a lot of money to do that. And there's a reason for that. The money. Who is ponying up the money for these research studies? I liken this to, I want to talk to you because I've seen something in the pharmaceutical industry over the years, and this is a way they do things. Let me explain to you. When a pharmaceutical company develops a new drug, they have to go through certain testing processes. They have to test it for toxicity, and they have to test it, like on mice or different things for a while. But at some point, they get to the point when they want to market it, so they actually have to use human trials, right? These clinical trials. So the pharmaceutical companies set up with labs who are designed to do these clinical trials. But they don't always just choose one lab to do trials. They'll do multiple ones, 3, 4, 5 even sometimes, maybe even more. But what happens if one of those labs, or 2 of them, or whatever, come up with data that doesn't look favorably for their drug? Those studies are buried in a file somewhere. They never see the light of day. See, those labs, they get paid for that study, so it belongs to the drug company. They further have to sign non-compete, non-disclose contracts. The kind that says, I cross my heart, hope to die, and I know you'll run me out of business if I speak a word of it, kind of thing. And I see the same thing kind of happening here. The climate research world is incentivized to find man-made issues right now. And that's where you get the money. That's the way you have to do it if you want to get government money or corporate. There's a huge amount of corporate financing of one way or another. These, I don't know what you'd call them. A lot of them come through some of these non-profit organizations. I guess that's the way we'll put it. And I don't think I like that very much. We shouldn't have big money directing where we research. That should be up to the scientists. That's my opinion. I want to go through that thing here too, because we seem to have shifted in our science these days. Anytime somebody tells me they're following the science anymore, my first question is, whose science? Let me explain. Science has shifted from the how does it work to prove that this is man-made so we can justify the policy. You see what I'm saying? We've already decided the answer. Now we want to just show that evidence to support that. I want to go back through. I remember from my high school days and in school, the chemistry class and science classes, we talked about the scientific method. Let's compare the two a little bit. Back when I was there going through the scientific method was what they call a vertical ladder, if you will. It was 5 or 6 strict steps. If you didn't follow them in order, it wasn't science. Step 1 was observation. You see something interesting that you couldn't explain. So step 2, you ask the question why. Step 3, you kind of make an educated guess. The if and then and maybe and why, things, answer questions, and you make a hypothesis. 4, you experiment. You design tests to see if your guess or your hypothesis was correct. And in step 5, you analyze that data. And 6, you decide if your guess was right or wrong. Right? And so we had an answer if whether it is it true or are we still not sure? But in today's world, we do it differently. It's not a ladder. It's a complex web or a cycle. The modern version acknowledges that science is often unpredictable, doesn't always start with a question. I'm trying to figure out how you start with the answer and then end up with the question. Here's my problem with it. In this model, we don't have to prove our theory. We just have to show that there is evidence to support it. Not sure I'd like gambling our world's future on, well, it's a theory, I don't actually have to prove it, I just have to show a little bit of evidence that it might be true. All right, I'll ramble on something else now, but that's the part that bothers me. The reality here is, I think we're heading down a pathway that leads to a cliff. And we're all being forced on that pathway. Let me explain. This is kind of one of the follow the money parts. We look at the scale of the current path. World leaders want to spend almost 10% of the world's GDP every year until 2050 to fight climate change. So here's the $9 trillion question. We are attempting to spend this 10% of the world's total income to fix a single variable, CO2. That is for the next 25 years, according to projections. That's $225 trillion, and all with absolutely no guarantees. My problem with that is by spending all of our resources trying to stop climate change, the mitigation part, we are leaving ourselves broke and unable to prepare for the adaptation period that we might want to look into. If the change turns out to be natural, we will have spent trillions of dollars on the wrong solution. The danger isn't just the warmer planet, as I see it. It's an economic cliff where we've bankrupted ourselves and rebuilt our entire civilization based on a hunch that ignores 80% of the Earth's natural metabolism. When I say bankrupted, there's a whole lot of countries around the world are already right on the precipice of bankruptcy. This always leads me to the other part of the money. Whenever we have governments involved, as you can see because of the Minnesota thing and California thing we're hearing about, a huge, huge level of fraud. I don't know why, but fraud and government just seem to go together hand in hand, which I find repugnant at best. But let's look at this. The World Bank estimates that roughly $1 trillion a year is paid out in bribes. Over 25 years, if the world community spends the $225 trillion, the bribery tax, that alone could be a significant amount. Their conservative estimates say 18 trillion. But if you do the math, it's closer to 25. Even if the world community becomes twice as efficient as it is today, which is not likely, the baseline of human error and occupational fraud rarely drops below 5% of total revenue. So, even if we assume that they can somehow fix this and only be 5% inefficient and lose that much to fraud, based on that $225 trillion, that's still $11.25 trillion over 25 years. To put that number in perspective against the world's smaller economies, we can look at it in two ways. How many countries will it take to equal that annual loss, and how many it takes to equal the total 25-year loss? Annually, that would be $450 billion. So that would equal the total GDP of countries like South Vietnam, Malaysia, or Denmark. But if we take the $455 billion annual loss and we combine that to the GDP of 75 of the smallest nations on Earth, right? 75 of the smallest nations, it would take every dime of their GDP every year to pay just for the loss. That's like countries like Bahamas and Fiji and places like that. But let's look at the whole figure, that 11.25 trillion. According to the World Bank and the IMF data, the bottom 157 countries in the world out of roughly 195 nations have a combined annual GDP of approximately 11 trillion. So we're talking a lot of money. The amount lost to fraud over 25 years is equivalent to the entire annual economic output of 80% of the world's nations combined. So in a cumulative scale, that entire 25-year economic history would consume the GDP of the bottom 75 countries. So they would have no GDP whatsoever. We would consume it all in fraud. And I know this seems hypothetical, but it always turns out true. Like I said, if you've been watching my podcast on the Minnesota fraud thing, if you're watching the news, you know, California's going to make Minnesota look like a super efficient state, I think, before it's all done. But in simpler terms, the fraud tax on this global spending is like taking every dollar produced by the 75 smallest nations on the planet for the next 25 years and throwing it away, in my opinion. So where do we go from here? Do we as humans go back to living in caves, using animal skins to stay warm? I mean, we can't use fires, right? You know, the CO2 thing. So meat's probably out because, you know, we can't cook it. CO2, right? I guess it's roots and berries and stuff. I say that in jest a little bit, but, you know, I'm not sure what they think the alternative will be for us. The other option is we can spend ourselves into oblivion on the current model to fix a problem and risk world bankruptcy. Many countries are already there. Or the last option, we could have another pandemic to wipe out much of the Earth's population so we don't have as many polluters. And if you don't think that's an option, make sure you listen to my Do We Value Human Life Anymore podcast that's up on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. It's a good companion to this podcast. Check it out. I think you'll be surprised. So I think I'm going to stop there today. I've given you a lot of information, a lot of weird things to think about, but that's what I do. But sometimes, even though it sounds silly maybe on the surface, if we don't examine the different ideas, the different things, how can we come to a real true realization what the problem is? We have to examine all the facts, no matter where they come from. So I'm going to leave you with that today. I appreciate you for listening. Thank you for joining me. I hope you found it entertaining, educational, or thought-provoking. Join me next time, won't you? I'm Craig Warren, and this has been Ramblings of an Old Fart Podcast. God bless and keep you. Until next time.